I will be sharing this webinar today. It's a pleasure to have you all here in our webinar of the series Using Mobile Phone Data for Official Statistics. This webinar is promoted by the UN Big Data and Regional Hub in Brazil, with support of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, to the Knowledge Transmission Network of the Statistical Conference of the Americas. You can visit the Regional Hub webpage at hub.ibge.gov.br, where you can read about future webinars and workshops. And additionally, you may access the records of our past activities. And now it's time to talk about transportation and commuting statistics. The main purpose of these statistics is to understand how people access jobs, service, and leisure. And since the widespread adoption of mobile phones, this task has reached another step and has some challenges we need to trespass. In this webinar, we will learn how NSOs, National Statistics Offices, are handling these challenges and producing information. Today we have two guests, and they will speak for about 20 minutes each. After that, we'll have 10 minutes for questions and answers. Please place your questions on the chat, and we will bring them at the end of the session. Then, our first speaker is Mr. Bijit Deb. He's from the United Arab Emirates Statistics Office, and it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And the floor is yours, Bijit. I will share your presentation. Just wait a minute. Okay, you can go.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for inviting us, and we are very happy to help you set up the Brazil Regional Hub. And we have today two speakers, one Bijit Dev, working as a data architect in the Transport Authority, and along with me is Dr. Raj, who is a chief specialist also in the Transport Authority, specializing in transport analytics. Now, we are part of the UN mobile phone data task team led by Esperanza. And within the task team, we are working in the transport and commuting statistics subgroup, co-chaired by Alex and Latifa Al-Shehi. The objective of this of today's session is so we have prepared a mobile phone data handbook, which gives a general idea of how to use mobile phone data or mobile positioning data in transport statistics. And today's objective is to give an overview of that handbook. Next slide, please. Maria, next slide. Okay, so what are the objectives of the mobile positioning data handbook? Now, there are generally four objectives that we are trying to cover from the handbook. One is we are providing a practical guidance on how to collect and aggregate data from mobile positioning data so that they can be used for producing transport and commuting statistics. We are also trying to use any non-domain specific material developed from the other handbooks wherever it is relevant. We are also covering a number of use cases which have either succeeded or they are producing good statistics for other countries who are trying to use mobile phone data for some of their use cases. And then also we have covered a bit of data quality control, how to ensure data privacy, and other relevant standards when using the mobile phone data. Next slide. Yes. So as a transport planner, the transport statistician, they always rely on several sources of data. why do they need to analyze the transport statistics? There can be many objectives, but the top three are obviously to understand how people and goods are moving around countries using roads, railways, waterways, seas, and the air. To know how people access their job, surveys, and leisure, and whether they have access to transport services, how much distance they are traveling in on average by different transport modes, and the total number of trips taken to do capacity and demand management as well. The third one would be to understand the quantities of goods that is shipped on different modes in different countries. Now, the statisticians, they rely on two different types of data source. One is the legacy data source, and the other ones are the emerging data sources. So in legacy data sources, what are the typical data sources that comes under the legacy data source? Obviously, there are regulatory data for transport, there are surveys and census data, there is transport network information, there is vehicle traffic data captured from different vehicles, there is ticketing data, there is safety and accident data, there is vehicle and driver registration data, as well as there are logistics data. Now, currently, the statisticians are also using a new set of data sources which are clubbed under emerging data sources. The first one is definitely the probe vehicle data. Second, with the advent of autonomous and connected vehicle, there are a lot of data that is being generated, which are very helpful. Then there is high definition mapping of the streets and the areas, and therefore then the final one that is the subject of our discussion today is mobile phone data. Can we go to the next screen, please? Now, what is mobile phone data? Mobile phone data is form of big data which results from the high data volume of mobile positioning tracking of the location of the mobile phone. So whenever you are using a mobile phone, that is being tracked by the different mobile network operators. Whenever you are accessing cell towers, when you are sending any messages or doing any calls, all these are tracked through this cell phone towers as a location tracking, and this generates a lot of high volume of mobile data, considered a form of big data. This mobile positioning data can be used for generating population and tourism statistics. They can be used for measuring the human mobility. They can be used for creating data-driven solutions for urban planning, establishing a response to any crisis plan or disasters, etc. Now, there are three types of mobile phone data. One is the data that is coming from the mobile network operator, MNO. Now, the MNOs or the cell phone provider who is providing you the cell phone service, they can collect the data either through the CDR, that is the call detail record. Whenever you make a call or receive a call, or you receive an SMS or send an SMS, that the data is generated, your location data is generated. Then there is passive signaling data, which include logs of every connection to any mobile device to the network. Again, this is like very passive, which is less active than the CDR data. And then there are active signaling data when the MNOs decide to ping your mobile to generate a location of your mobile device. Now, apart from the data that is generated from the MNOs, there are lots of and tons of data generated from the smartphone applications. Now, these smartphone applications generally use your GPS sensors, and they are very highly accurate because the accuracy is within few meters. Whenever you open an app, you do a check-in or you connect to a public network, or any map which is collecting your location on your background or your foreground. So through these ways, like a lot of data can be generated from the smartphone. Then obviously there is digital survey data where you send user response, through phones you answer those response either through online surveys or mobile app surveys or digital diaries. Next slide, please. Now, we understand that mobile phone data is a very prudent source of data which can be used for our benefit to derive a lot of transport statistics, but there are both downsides and upsides of using mobile phone data. Now, mobile phone data has higher spatiotemporal detail than the corresponding traditional output. Now, like like whenever I am generating a data from a ticketing data or from a survey data, I may be knowing only an area where you reside, but mobile phone data can give me a much more accurate data, thus more spatiotemporal detail. There is very negligible cost of generating the forecasts because everyone is using cell phone these days, and the CDR is collected passively by the MNOs. The mobile phone data can give you an end-to-end vision of the whole aspect of mobility. The traditional sources of data, they give you every source gives you a specific areas or specific aspects of mobility. They give a specific information, but mobile phone data gives you an end-to-end information on all aspects of mobility. The time taken to collect this data again is very less because this data is inherently collected by the MNOs. And again, as I said, since this is automatically collected, there is very less cost associated, incremental cost associated to collect this data. Now, when we come to the drawbacks of the MPD, there are certain inherent limitations of the mobile positioning data, and as such, they cannot totally replace the traditional sources or the legacy sources. The first one is obviously when you collect the MNOs data due to PII, the mobile net due to any PII or personally identified information restrictions like regulations like GDPR, MNOs they somehow don't want to share any personal details. You may have the location data, but you don't have any details regarding the user backdrop, their purpose, their characteristics, their socio-economic indicators, their means of transport. It's not being shared by the MNOs, which some of the traditional sources can give us, like the survey data, which gives you very detailed background of the users that is responding to the survey. Again, since like the cell phone towers are very densely populated in the city area, you get more details of the users who are commuting in the city area. But once you go into the more urban areas, like less populated urban areas where the cell phone towers are not that much, you get very less details. So maybe your cell phone connects every 1 kilometer to a cell phone tower, whereas in city that might connect every 50 meters or every 100 meters. Now, what is the measure of the mobile positioning data usability? Now, as I said, that there are two types of data: the MNO data, the mobile network operator data, and the application data. Now, how do I measure whether my mobile phone data is useful or not? There are 5 factors which it defines. One is latency. The latency is the time delay between collection of the mobile phone data and it is available for the end user to analyze it. The precision, the accuracy in terms of how accurately it is determining the location of the cell phone tower or the user's location. The ping rate, if there are active pings done by the MNOs to determine your location, the number of pings that the MNOs are doing, the user penetration. For example, some of the application data, some of the users, because of any privacy concern, they do not give proper access to a lot of permissions to different apps to grant access to their location, cell phone location. So user penetration is one of the key factors, and obviously the completeness. the total number of attributes that you collect from the mobile positioning data, whether it gives you a complete picture of all the mobility aspects. Again, the picture on the right hand side gives you indication of the different, the cell phone data that the MNOs are collecting, or the data that is collected from the application data, how much, whether it's low or medium or high medium. So if I see for latency, cell phone records is like medium low or medium high, whereas background location data from any application, it constantly checks the background of the user. The latency is very high. Precision, again, GPS data, whenever a user check in to through an app, or opens an app, or connects to a Wi-Fi network, if the data from the GPS networks have high precision, whereas the cell phone records, they give a low medium precision. Again, ping rate is from the active signaling data. Whenever the MNOs are pinging your mobile for your location, the user penetration, and the completeness of the data. Next slide. Now, what is a typical flow for MPD data? Now, there are on a high level 6 kind of stakeholders for any mobile positioning data. One is the commuter, who represents the general public whose mobile phones are used as the raw data source. Then there are data collectors and providers. They are who collect the data from the commuters and provide it to the end user. Then there are data regulators, like the government or the non-governmental organization, who sets a standard of how this mobile phone data can be shared or regulated. Then there are end users. These are the statisticians who are using this data to analyze the data and figure out or plan on basis of this data. And then there are benefactors, who are not only the authorities, but also as a commuter you are also a benefactor, because because of this data there is a planning which increases the bus service or any public transport service in your city, then ultimately you are also the benefactor of the mobile phone data. Now, there are different types of processing steps in MPD. On a high level, the first step is to anonymize the mobile phone data, where we remove any kind of personally identifiable information such as name, age, address. Then we do data cleaning. We denoise the data. So there are a lot of noise on mobile phone data, which we try to remove. And then there is smoothing. Smoothing is like, for example, we are removing any inaccurate data, and denoise is moving duplicate data or irrelevant data. Then we do data integration, because mobile phone data can come from various data sources. One is the CDR data, one is the application data, user check-in data, one is the background activity data, and then the other one may be the active signaling data. So all this data comes in different formats. So we need to standardize this data and make it in one form, so that we can have a single coherent data set to analyze. Now, these is generally, they are joined by either by user ID or any common attributes that the MNOs use. Then finally, we do a data aggregation, where we reduce the high volume of data into a manageable chunk of data, which the statistician can analyze based on maybe use case, it can be based on a particular area, a particular pin code, a particular zip code, any of the attributes we can choose to aggregate the data, which is the final product or the final data set that the statisticians use to to analyze. Next slide. Now, again, as I said, there are limitations to mobile phone data on a high level. Access, because of different regulations from government agencies, not all mobile phone data is available for analyzing. Only a subset of the mobile phone data is available for analysis. Then there are privacy concerns. So none of the MPD data can be attributed to demographics, and MNOs are generally hesitant to share any kind of demographic data due to GDPR data privacy regulations. Then there can be biases. For example, the mobile phone can be used by a certain community, though it is very less. But for example, children, old people, or for example, immigrants, they don't have access to mobile phone, so it can have a bias to a certain kind of people. Precision is again a kind of a bias, because a limitation, because the CDR data is generally have very low precision, because as I said, it depends on the number of cell phone towers in the area. And then the processing, since it is a very it's with high noise and high resolution data set, it needs a large scale data infrastructure or IT infrastructure to process your data. Now, next slide, please. So now I'll invite Dr. Raj to speak. Dr. Raj from our team will take over.
Hey guys, I hope you can hear me. So thank you, Bijit, for the very quick introduction and the detail on how mobile phone data can be used in transportation. So there are a couple of more slides where we talk about typical applications of mobile phone data in transportation. And we have covered a couple of use cases, 3 use cases to be precise, from around the world, how mobile phone data is currently being used in transportation. So at a very high level, I think in the last 5 years, especially due to the pandemic, the data collection with respect to transportation has become very difficult, and several cities and agencies have moved on to using mobile phone as one of the key sources of transportation data. So some of the applications are, for example, transport statistics. So agencies regularly either publish transport statistics, such as personal vehicle travel, personal miles traveled, vehicle miles traveled, etc. So some agencies use, for example, overall fuel sold to calculate these things. But recently, there are agencies that use mobile phone data to understand how people travel, especially with the use of soft mobility modes. Fuel is decreasingly becoming a reliable factor for this. So and electric vehicles as well. So mobile phone data is giving a better estimate of how much people travel and from where to where, etc. So this is the first application. Second one is traffic statistics, for example, to determine the volume of traffic in certain roadway segments, identifying congested areas from population density data, assess average movement of speeds, etc. That's the second application. The third is obviously the transport and urban planning. So because of the attribution of mobile phone data to specific cell phones, you can actually determine the origin destination metrics using mobile phone data. You can determine the dwell time by attributing the origin destination locations to specific points of interest. You can also determine things like trip purpose, etc. So this is the third application of mobile phone data. The fourth one is transit and public transport planning. So similar to transport and urban planning, in transit and public transport planning, most agencies, they kind of know how their people use public transportation within their network. But when it comes to how people reach to their network, for example, did people walk to the bus stop or bike to the bus stop, etc., the transport agencies don't have much information. So that kind of use cases also, agencies have been using mobile phone data. The fifth one is traffic analysis, which is similar to this traffic statistics, but the main difference is that this is more real time. So for example, in real time, you see like a huge influx of population density on a freeway segment. it can trigger some alerts on something is going on. Similarly, the operational decision support. This is again to understand in real time what is the status of public transport networks, especially transport, the bus system and metro system, etc. And for operational decision support, this data can be used. Then I would say the seventh use case is events and crisis management. So this is again a well-established use case. A lot of new events management committees and events management company, they use population density data, Bluetooth sniffers, and all those things to identify people crowding at different locations. For example, recently in the Expo 2021 in Dubai, we've used how population data, both from mobile phone towers as well as from Wi-Fi sniffing, it can be used in identifying public transport or needs and people crowding in different locations. The last one is obviously the demand prediction. So here the idea is that not just daily traffic volumes can be used to forecast, but also the increase in mobile phone usage in some of the underserved area or some of the newer business district is a indication of new population being generated, new trips being generated in those locations, and it serves as a need for new services in those areas. So these are at a high level, 8 applications of mobile phone data in transportation. Next, we will cover 3 use cases. If you go to the next slide. Okay, so here the first one, I think you can go to the next slide because we have a slide in detail on each of this. Maria, you can go to the next slide.
Go to the next slide.
Okay, so the first one is actually an interesting use case from Seoul, Korea. So they had an issue where they didn't have much data on people movement at nights because they didn't have a nighttime service. And so designing a nighttime service was difficult. So what they did at a high level is they went through the call data records, which is the call logs, to identify how people move across Seoul, city Seoul, during the nighttime hours. And also they checked over 5 million taxi rides to understand how what trips are made, etc. And once they overlaid this information into specific planning tools, they could easily design a nighttime bus service. So based on this, they have targeted, basically the night services for night shift workers. So they introduced something called the OWL bus service based on this data. So this is an example of using NPD in public transport planning when there is no active transportation data. So if you go to the next slide. So this one is actually a commuter statistics use case where Indonesia, so similar to other cities, Indonesia has been using household travel surveys. So anyone familiar with household travel survey, you know that it's mostly, most cities, they call or have face-to-face interviews or focus groups of commuters to understand how they travel, what is their departure time, what mode they take, what is their trip purpose, etc. And based on this, they improve the transportation network. But this is a very, very costly process because because it's a survey data, so you need to conduct surveys, you need to have phone calls, interviews, etc. So what Indonesia did in 2019 is that in order to just supplement this survey data, they also used mobile phone data. So thereby, previously they had I would say, survey penetration of 5,000 to 50,000 subscribers, but all of a sudden, by using mobile phone data, this increased a lot. So they had data from 50,000 additional subscribers, and they analyzed the commuter patterns, and this was used to improve the transportation long-term transportation plans for the region. So if you go to the next slide. So this is actually a use case from our own Dubai. So in 2021, Dubai RTA and location, what we did was we wanted to use mobile phone data in optimizing a bus station. So we have a bus station called Al Gubai bus station. So obviously from the ticketing data, we had enough data about how people use our buses around that station, plus how people move from bus to other services like metro, taxi, marine, etc. But we had little information on how people reached the bus station and which buses they took. Yeah. So we used mobile phone data to basically track their first and last mile service. And we use that information to optimize the laybys. So for example, if we saw that a community used a specific bus route, then the laybys close to that community were given to that bus route. So they need to walk less to reach their bus route. So that kind of optimization actually helped increasing our customer satisfaction level by almost 7%. And since this change, we had consistently high Google reviews as well, almost 4.8 star. So this is another example of using micro optimization of bus station using mobile phone data. So I think this concludes our presentation. So a lot of effort has been gone into developing this handbook. So thanks to all the contributors. But if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and Vijit and myself, we will try our best to answer. Or you can shoot out emails to these two email addresses. And thank you everyone.
Thank you very much for the complete overview of the use of mobile phone data in the area of transportation. It's really impressive. And now our second speaker is Mr. Dorian, that comes from the Federal Statistics of Germany, where they are developing experimental statistics using new source of data. Welcome, Dorian. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the very interesting presentation we just listened to. I'm very happy to be here today to present our experiences in doing experimental statistics using mobile network data here in Germany at the Federal Statistical Office. We mostly call it the Status. It's an easier term. So my name is Dorian Lejeune. I'm working in our unit for research in new digital data, and I would say we are the main unit currently that looks into using mobile network data for official statistics. Of course, we have a lot of different statistics being produced in our office, but today, as it's the topic of this webinar, I will focus on the things that we looked into in the context of transportation and commuting statistics. Okay, so to begin with, I just want to give a short explanation why I am explicitly talking about experimental statistics. We use this term to label projects, results that we publish that are not yet on or not yet meeting the standards that we have for official statistics. So anytime that we do projects with new potential data sources or new methods, we just label it as an experimental statistics to kind of just make it clear that there's still some more work to do until we can call it like official statistics. And we also, as I just said, publish these results. There we have two main channels, or which you can also look into, but I have to say that the second one is only available in Germany, but the first one, our Esta page, it also is translated into English, although our articles there in their English version are much shorter than the German ones. But anyway, that's our platform where we publish the results of our ongoing or finished projects on experimental statistics, and we will also, or you will also see that we have articles on different topics with regards to mobile network data that we published there. So feel free to look into it. The second one is our dashboard Deutschland or Germany. So that's a product where we try to deliver different kind of indicators to provide information on different topics to the public, which does also include some indicators based on mobile network data. But to my knowledge, it's sadly only available in German. Anyway, feel free to have a look into it. But now to get into the topic of today's presentation, I just want to give a brief overview on the mobile network market in Germany. So the market in general is basically split between 3 different companies, of which 2 of them offer their data for further usage for private companies or official institutions such as us. And at the Status, at our office, we had projects looking into mobile network data since 2017. Maybe also with regards on the previous presentation, it's important to say that we only use or only used so far a mobile network data that is based on passive signals. So other sources of data, for example, from smartphone applications, are topics that we haven't looked into so far. But we also did cover different areas of research. So we had publications in the area of population statistics, mobility and traffic statistics that I will talk about today. And we also looked into the areas of tourism, labor market statistics, and environmental statistics, although there's not much progress that has been made in these areas yet. Okay, so I will just start to give a brief overview on the relevant projects that we did in the area of transportation and commuting. And the first one would be the project Pendler Mobil. So it's about commuters. And the goal of this project was to explore the potential of MNO data to support the official statistics on commuters. And basically what we learned from it was that these origin destination matrices that we used based on MNO data were or still are very promising, especially due to their spatial and temporal resolution, which is something that the official data used so far couldn't match. However, we also saw that when it comes to absolute numbers of commuters, for example, that the MNO data tend in this case to underestimate their numbers. And also when it came to the topic of trying to filter out commuters from all the movements that are registered in the data, that some of these restrictions or some of these criteria that we introduced just showed us that there is a trade-off between identifying certain population groups in the MNO and to preserve as much information as possible. So to give you an example, as one way to identify commuters, we had several criteria, and one of it was that they had to arrive in their identified work municipality before 9 a.m. And this criteria alone does introduce some problems when thinking about people with different work schedules that might not arrive at their work before 9 a.m. But we're pretty positive that these are problems that can be solved in the future. Another project that is just coming to an end but will be extended this year is called Verbindungen or Connections. It's a project that is backed by the Federal Ministry of Digital and Transport and consists of a consortium made up from government institutions, universities, and also data providers. And the goal here is basically to further develop methods to improve some of the aspects of mobile network data. So, for example, one big focus was to improve the way that the extrapolation does work. So when we acquire data from one data provider, they also have to use some kind of extrapolation to get the absolute numbers of movements, not for their customers, but for the whole population. And we saw that this is a problematic aspect because when the data providers are using market shares, it's on the one hand not very transparent for us, but also at least from what we saw, not always really fitting to the official numbers. And one aspect that we are looking into right now is just to do a big survey to get more information on the German population and how they are using their mobile phones, so that we can use this data to better this extrapolation and to get more precise numbers out of the mobile network data. Another big topic that we worked on was mobility indicators, not focused on any specific mode of transport, because in the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was also a huge debate in Germany, and I'm pretty sure in many other countries as well, on the different kind of policy measures that were introduced to battle the pandemic. I guess the most famous were the lockdowns, which restricted movement quite heavily in many parts of the world. So we introduced or we published mobility indicators that basically tried to show the changes in mobility or the changes in movement detected on a very low level, at least for our for what we're used to, and also combined these indicators with different additional data sources. For example, the incidence rates. You can see it here on the right. Sadly, it's the German version that I can only present, but that was a valuable data source, maybe not in the context of transportation and commuting policy, but it showed that, I mean, mobility in general can also touch different policy fields, and this has been proven to be an interesting data source for the public. But based on the data we used there, we also acquired data from one data provider that also identified the different means of transport that were used. And there was also maybe also as kind of a lucky coincidence, in this time there was also a big policy measure being introduced at the same time, and that was the so-called €9 ticket. So as kind of an experimental policy measure, Germany introduced a ticket for €9 that allowed people to use most or all of public transport, and that was introduced for 3 months. Now we have it permanently, although it costs €49. But still, right at this time, we could use the data that we had on the means of transport to publish ad hoc analysis to provide a kind of, or to support at least the ad hoc evaluation of this policy measure. Because as you also can see on the right on the graph, that the time when this ticket was available between June and August last year, you can see a very clear rise in the usage of the rail transport. And that also allowed us to kind of support the public debate on this whole policy idea and to provide some data on it. We also used this opportunity to have a closer look at this kind of data and combined it, for example, with official data on tourism on regions that that see a high level of tourism, or regions that see a lower level of tourism, and also we made a distinction between rural and urban regions, just to see, or to get closer to the question what people use this ticket for, because there was also something that the transportation companies could not answer, at least back then, and there was also an topic of debate if this whole ticket was only being used for people to go on vacation and not for real commuting. So at least this approach gave us some hints on what the reality really was. So we see that especially in the rural, highly touristy areas, there was the biggest increase in the use of rail transportation. So it gave at least a hint on this idea that many people use this ticket actually to just go on holidays in summer, which was also an interesting information to provide to the public. However, also this this data we use here showed some strong restrictions that we also had to clearly communicate. So, for example, as you can see, we have, or you can't see it here, but in the graph before, we have the road transport as one category, but the data provider was not able to further distinguish between the mode of transport used. So we couldn't say if people went to use their car or to use a bus and therefore public service, which was a very interesting question last year. And also, for example, the data provider was only able to identify these means of transports for journeys that were longer than 30 kilometers, which is, of course, also a big restriction when looking into the day-by-day behavior of people, or the mobility behavior of people every day. So to give a short summary on our experiences with mobile network data so far in this area, and maybe also an outlook on further projects, on future projects that we will do. The biggest issue for us, especially as a government institution and provider of official statistics, was that the data generating process, data aggregation process, also for a big part, is still a black box. So we do not have transparency when it comes to the steps that the data providers take to create the data set that we will receive in the end. And this is, of course, a big problem that we are also looking into. So we have a project called ANIGET that is just starting, which tries to build upon developments that have been done already, and to establish a kind of production pipeline of mobile network data, going from the more or less raw data, although we have to see how raw we can get this data, that will start there and end at the data set that's ready for analysis. And that's something that we put hope in. Then, of course, mobile network data is also in need for validation methods. The data providers, they do have some validation methods and they told us about them, but still, when we want to do official statistics with mobile network data, also publishing absolute numbers, then it's a big topic that we need to look into. And as I said before, in the project Verbindungen, there will be a follow-up that aims on improving the estimates of absolute numbers through a survey among the German population to get numbers on their demographics and also their usage of mobile phones. And as the last bullet point here, which became quite clear, I think, in what I said previously, is that the access to the data needs to be regulated, in our case, as a government institution. So before we can do official statistics, we need a regulated and established access to this kind of data. And that was an issue so far, because this kind of data requires a lot of resources and time, especially when you go through the whole process of acquiring these data sets from a data provider. So at some points, we've just been lucky that we had the data at hand, and then some policy measure was introduced that we could do some analysis on. But in the future, of course, this is a big topic that we need to tackle. And that's already it. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your invitation. And of course, if you do have any questions, feel free to ask here or to contact us via email.
Thank you, Dorian. By the way, the next webinar will be on data access. So on July, we will have a webinar, and we are discussing here about data access. I understand that it's a big issue. We have, as official producers of information, we need to have the data access guaranteed, because we can't stop the production of information anytime. It's very hard to think about official statistics without a guarantee of data access. And mobile phone data access, it's a very hard question all over the world. Andrea, the attendees was allowed to put questions on the chat. So, if you have some, yes?
María.
Sí.
No escuché, perdón.
Okay. At meantime, I have a question. Some years ago, I thought that mobile phone data was a big solution to commuting statistics, because we have fast responses. We don't need to burden the responders, who have it automatically. But now, after the pandemic, most part of people are working from home. And so what about using mobile phone data for measuring commuting? So it's a question for you too, Dorian and Bijit. Can you talk about a little bit about this issue of home office and commuting statistics using mobile phone data?
So if it's all right, I would just start. I mean, I'm not sure if this is a big problem, because I still think that using mobile network data does still allow to do statistics, and maybe also to even get a better look into the usage of home office. So at least in the last couple of months, we had some institutions also coming to us and asking us or also newspapers asking us if we can see any kind of pattern, because people tend to use more home office now in the mobile network data. And to be honest, so far we haven't seen it, but it's also very dependent on the type of aggregation of the data that we use. So we want to look into it more closely in the future. So maybe I would even say it otherwise, if I understood your question right, that mobile network data does also have the advantage that it makes it easier to get numbers on people staying at home than traditional data sources on commuting would allow us to do.
Birgit, do you have any comments to do?
Maybe I can take a stab at it. So I think your question is regarding telecommuting, how to estimate the percentage of telecommuters, which is basically, interestingly, has been recently added as a mode of transport in at least in the US Census, so National Household Travel Survey. So mobile phone data definitely can help in understanding the telecommuting patterns, especially because usually mobile phone data is used to understand the home location, office location based on the dwell time. So usually it attributes, mobile phone attribution between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. period as home, and during the daytime periods as your work location. And this kind of attribution is what's used to convert mobile phone data or estimate the percentage of telecommuters.
Okay, thank you for your comments. And another question, Dorian, in your statistics, experimental statistics, are you using the 3 mobile phone operators or just one?
For most of the projects, we only use data of one. So of the 3 data, or of the 3 MNOs in Germany, only 2 give access to their data at all, or only 2 of them provide aggregated data sets. So that's, of course, also a big issue when going forward to real production of official statistics. But I think we're pretty sure that at some point in the future, also the 3rd MNO will enter this business, just because it is it seems logical. But yeah, for most of our projects, we could only use data from one provider. We also at one point did a comparison, which was also interesting to see that the 2 different MNOs also have a different set of customers. So the one was having more urban, younger customers, the other data provider more of the elderly customers. And that's, of course, also then a factor that we want to take into account going forward with future projects.
Okay, thank you. And Birgit, a question for you. Application, data from application, do you think it's easier to access that data from mobile operators?
So if I understand your question, you are saying that whether it's easy to access data from mobile operators, is that correct?
Yes.
No, collection and having data from mobile operators is always challenging. There are certain set of regulations, and that is different in every country. Like it is different from country to country. But what I believe is none of the mobile operators, or most of the mobile operators, are reluctant to share a low level of data. Most of them are sharing aggregated data. and obviously they have some logic to remove any attributions which can relate to any demography. So it's kind of a challenging, but again, depends on the country's laws and regulation that govern the sharing of mobile data with the authority.
Okay, thank you. And now a question from Dominic for you too. Of course, we have some bias from mobile phone as children and elderly, some kind of rural and urban differences. But we have another bias that people usually in some countries, here in Brazil is very common, have more than one SIM card. So they have more than one phone numbers. So do you have some kind of treatment to this issue? If I remember, someone from Indonesia was trying to using for tourism statistics, was trying to combine with traditional statistics to solve this kind of problems.
Maybe I can take this because we did incur this kind of difficulty. So typically for statistical purposes, it's actually not that difficult because mobile phone operators, because when you register for mobile phone, you use some sort of identification. So at an aggregate level, they know the average number of SIM cards per person, and that kind of normalization is done in if you remember when Bijit talked about the multiple stages of processing, it's that kind of normalization is done in the mobile phone data. But if you're using it for some sort of planning and operational decision making, then it becomes a bit more difficult, because then you need to exactly narrow down who are those users with multiple SIM cards, and this again, it comes to the solutions that we use for denoising. So I think once the handbook is published, we have certain references of denoising techniques that can be used to kind of remove duplicate records, and to some extent this is basically duplicate records when mobile phones travel together, right? It could be just husband and wife, or it could be just a person with two cell phones. So there are certain techniques that can be used.
Jairam?
So yeah, I can't say very much to that because as we just heard, that's a step that's usually been done by the data provider, and we don't have like a detailed knowledge of the exact methods they use. I can only say that at least on the European level, there has been a so-called SNet Big Data 2 project, which dealt with establishing the use of MNO data for official statistics, and they provided code for the whole data aggregation and cleaning process, which also does include a module on deduplication. So if you're interested in the kind of methodological approach, maybe you can look into that.
Okay, thank you. And the last question, because we are on time, as I said before, the mobile data does not require responses and is collected automatically. Do you feel that there is enough transparency in how this data is being collected, what's being collected, and how it's being used? What do you think?
So maybe coming from the perspective of official statistics, and also in Germany, I think we tend to have very strict data privacy laws, at least many are complaining about it here. But I think for companies that might not be a big issue, because people at some point always agree into the usage of their data. But of course, for us, it's a very important aspect. So we do know, for example, that our colleagues in the Netherlands, they were very advanced when it came to using mobile network data for official statistics. But because some press articles kind of gave a bad twist on the whole thing, they really had to stop their work in this area, because the public debate, public opinion on this became really negative. So yeah, I think at least coming from the governmental institution perspective, this is one of the most important aspects to reach transparency. And until we don't have transparency into the process, we can also not publish MNO data as official statistics.
Yes, I think it is a big issue, the transparency and confidentiality, because when you talk about mobile phones, people feels that we are tracking them on the streets. So it's not easy to demystify this thinking. Most of people doesn't understand that it's not exactly that way, but it's very hard to explain. Bijay, do you have any comments?
Similarly, in Dubai, we have strict data privacy regulations, such as Dubai Data Law and data privacy regulations, which which governs any kind of data sharing from the MNO to the authority to do any kind of statistics or derive any kind of statistics on mobile phone data. But as I said, there are various ways the mobile data is collected. One is the data from the MNO, and the other is the smartphone application data. I think for the smartphone application data, user can actually give preference whether or not the data can be collected from the app. So user has the control over the data. And in the MNO data, obviously, again, the data is aggregated in such a format and shared with for statistics that there are no demographic attribution in that data. So there are very less chances of taking that data and identifying to a certain individual or person.
Okay, thank you. Well, I would like to thank you one more time. Thank you for being here with us, sharing your experience. And I invite you to return next month to our webinar. We will discuss data access. It's a big issue in mobile phone data for official statistics. So I hope to see you next month. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.